I always thought the scariest thing about space was the emptiness. That black, bottomless cold where even a thought sounds like a whisper. But I was wrong. The real horror was right beneath our feet, deep under the Earth's crust, while we built megacities, flew to Titan, and argued about reforms on Mars. Back then, I worked at a geoengineering station in the Pacific Rift. Just a regular shift, routine tasks, checking drilling platforms, analyzing crust samples, boredom mixed with pride in my work. We all believed humanity had reached its peak, built a civilization without limits, no longer dependent on gods or chance. But that day, the instruments went crazy. The pressure in the deep shafts spiked to values that shouldn't exist according to physics. At first, I thought it was a software glitch. Some technician had said updates were slowing down the system, but then we heard it. A sound. It came from inside the Earth, from its very core. A rumble that felt like a voice, too deep to be human. And for the first time, I felt that the future didn't belong to us. When the drill broke through the last layer of rock, a chasm opened below, vast as an underground ocean. None of our readings could explain what we'd found. It wasn't a cave or a natural fault. It was a megastructural space, perfect geometric shapes, massive hexagonal columns, and metallic glimmers fused with the stone around them. I watched it all through the SCAF drone we sent down for exploration. In that moment, I didn't feel fear or awe, just a strange numbness. We had found something unnamed, ancient, and clearly artificial. Later, I discovered traces of a radiation signature identical to that of the Chicxulub meteorite, the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. The official story said it was just a rock, a cosmic accident. But what we saw disproved the history that science was built upon. There was a civilization beneath us, alien as the void itself and older than our species by millions of years. At first, I hoped we had simply found the remains of a long-dead race, remnants of an ancient civilization. But when the SCAF drone transmitted the first bioscanner data, everything changed. Down there, deep below, there was movement, rhythmic, like the breathing of a colossal organism. And then I saw them. Creatures with chitin armor and twisted, jointed limbs, a fusion of insect and machine. They weren't animals. They carried constructs that looked like biomechanical extensions, moving across the walls with clear intent. We called them xenoids. No one knew how they got there. Later, scientists said they must have arrived with the asteroid that reshaped Earth's history, falling into hibernation while they waited for a wake-up signal. And our drilling stations had been the ones to send it. We were the fools who woke those who had slept for millions of years. And they were not pleased by our presence. They began to look upward. Through the cameras, I saw it. They were studying us. Now I'm writing this from an orbital station while the Earth burns beneath me. I saw the first wave of xenoids emerge to the surface through tectonic rifts. People ran in panic, military fleets returned from Mars, artificial intelligences proposed erasing the underground layers with quantum detonations, risking the planet itself. I don't know what we are anymore. We're no longer the kings of space. We're just the ones who accidentally woke the sleeping masters. But I still want to believe there's a way out. I analyzed the data on their neural structures, if you can call it that. And I think they're not beasts or conquerors. They're just trying to survive. Maybe if they hear us, we can avoid the end. But if not, then our story will be nothing more than a brief footnote in someone else's evolution. I never planned to save the world or witness the end of civilization when I signed a contract with the Geoenergy Corporation. I just needed money and a quiet place to forget about people and their endless noise. The Prometheus 9 station was located in the Pacific Clark Rift, almost 3 kilometers under the ocean. When I first saw it from the descent module window, it looked like a giant metal octopus clinging to the dark sea floor. No one talked about danger. Everyone said the same thing. The Ultra Extraction Energy Project would be humanity's next great step. We drilled deeper than anyone in history, 200 kilometers below the Earth's crust, into zones where heat melts steel and pressure crushes rock into crystals. We thought we'd tamed the planet, forced it to its knees, pulling power straight from the magma. And yet, from the first day, I felt something was wrong. In places where there should have been only dead silence, strange echoes sometimes appeared. They weren't sounds in the usual sense, more like pressure in the skull, an invisible weight pressing on the mind. I told myself it was just nerves. I was wrong. When the impulse hit, no one had time to react. The drill complex was cutting through another rock layer at 180 meters when every monitor flashed overload warnings. Imagine it. Everything, even the planet itself, suddenly trembled as if something below had struck the Earth with a giant hammer. I grabbed a railing and watched as the indicators showed something impossible, an energy surge equal to a nuclear blast, but without radiation. Then came the rumble. It didn't travel through air or metal. It passed straight through our bones like someone had plucked the strings of my spine. In that instant, we had opened something that had been deliberately sealed inside the planet. But I only understood that later. At the time, it just looked like a catastrophic accident. The cooling system melted, the drilling pipes folded like noodles, sensors screamed about pressure anomalies, and seismic waves spread across the globe. We didn't know we had caused the earthquakes that struck Alaska, Java, and the Marseille Dome in France that same day. We didn't know what we had uncovered. We were just trying to survive. I saw the sealed chamber for the first time when the central probe re-entered the shaft. We thought we had broken into an ancient magma pocket, but the fact that it was perfectly geometric, like a mathematically precise dome, was something none of us expected. I was assigned to analyze the telemetry, and as I sat before the holographic display, the walls of the chamber appeared. They weren't natural. There were patterns, ornaments, or maybe schematics, crafted not by hands, but by something that thought differently from us. The surface pulsed with residual energy. And that's when I saw the flash. Not light, information. As if a signal had emerged from the depths, too ancient to be immediately understood. I didn't yet know it was an awakening. I didn't know something inside that stone capsule was alive or asleep. I just felt the chill crawl through my body. The Earth wasn't empty. There was something inside it. And now that something knew we were here. We kept drilling, though I already knew we shouldn't. I felt like something was watching me through the layers of rock, like the very air in the station had grown heavier. Sometimes during the night shifts, when most of the crew were asleep in their pods, I heard a continuous low hum. It didn't come from the machines or the shaft. It was part of the planet itself. It slipped into my thoughts and wouldn't let me rest. I started digging through old reports and seismic archives, piecing together fragments. The point we were drilling into had been the epicenter of mysterious pulses recorded back in the 20th century. No one knew what they were, and the data had been classified. But now I knew more. What we'd found wasn't a void. It was a prison, a sarcophagus, or a vault, and we'd broken its seal. We thought we were extracting energy for humanity's future, but in truth, we were the ones who released something the planet itself had tried to hide. Now it's awake, and it's rising. I never believed in monsters, not because I thought I was brave or smarter than others, but because I always trusted logic more than human fears. But now, looking back, I understand. Monsters are real. They don't live in mountains, hide in the oceans, or come from space in flying saucers. They lived on Earth long before us and slept until our greed woke them. It all started after a drilling crew of 19 people vanished in the Gamma 17 shaft sector. People don't just disappear in a steel tunnel built under AI supervision where every meter is monitored by sensors. That doesn't happen. But it did. We sent a rescue team, and they vanished too. I tried to convince myself it was a collapse, an overload, anything but the unknown. But soon, I had to admit the obvious. We weren't alone. When Station Command decided to send the first recon drone down, no one expected to see anything unusual. What surprises could there be in a tunnel we built ourselves? But the deeper the drone descended, the stronger the feeling grew that it was flying not through our station, but into another world. The metal galleries were damaged, not chaotically like from a collapse, but precisely, deliberately, as if someone had dismantled them by hand, carefully clearing space. The video feed shook. The camera caught bits of rebar and melted traces along the walls. We thought we were seeing heat damage or plasma torch residue, but the metal was fused in strange, selective patterns, as if exposed to an unknown type of focused energy. Then the drone entered one of the widened shafts where the drilling crew should have been working. Instead of people, the walls were covered in claw marks and patches of some kind of continuous biopolymer, like chitin. I knew it couldn't be natural, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare. I still can't fully explain what drove me in that moment: fear, curiosity, or some dull instinct that pushes a person to look where they shouldn't. At a depth of 212 meters, the drone detected movement. At first, I saw only blurred darkness and dust. Then, a shape appeared in the frame. Something elongated with a segmented body like a giant insect. But this creature moved with purpose, too coordinated to be an animal. It didn't crawl. It walked, springy and fast like a training droid in a hangar. It had limbs that looked like pincers, a glossy armored shell, and pale, gray, faceted eyes with no pupils. When it turned its head and looked straight into the camera, I went cold. I realized it didn't just see the machine. It understood it was being watched. Then I saw a second, a third, a 10th. They emerged from the depths of the tunnel in groups, moving in sync, as if patrolling. Each one had built-in devices on its chitin armor: biomechanical plates, cables, glowing lines of energy. They weren't animals. They were beings that knew how to build and how to fight. At that moment, I was certain they were behind the disappearance of the drilling team. But the most terrifying realization came later. These creatures didn't look surprised or alarmed by our presence. They acted as if they had known we would come. One of them raised a limb, and the drone recorded a flash of an energy pulse. The feed cut out, and our screen went black. No one on the station dared to say what we were all thinking, but I could feel the tension building, like static before a storm. I understood then that we weren't facing a natural phenomenon or a byproduct of drilling or even an undiscovered species. We had encountered a civilization that had lived beneath us, perhaps for millions of years. Their technology was biological, seamlessly fused with their bodies, like an extension of their nervous systems. And if they were watching us, it meant they were planning something. And I knew that whatever it was, it would be the beginning of a war, where we wouldn't be the masters of this planet. I used to believe that truth was made of numbers and facts, not legends and ghost stories. But after I saw the beings from the depths, all of my usual beliefs collapsed. They weren't an accident of evolution, not just some strange form of life. They were something more. And that something more had known about us for a long time, while we still believed we were the only intelligent species on this planet. I thought what I'd seen in the mine was the peak of horror, but I was wrong. The real shock came later, when the research teams arrived: archaeologists, astrophysicists, biologists, all called in under the emergency protocol. Usually, people like that argue for weeks before reaching even a vague consensus. But not this time. They were too terrified by what they found in the drill scanner data and the residual energy traces. According to their analysis, those creatures, the Xenoids, weren't from Earth. They came from somewhere else. The first solid evidence came when they compared the unique energy signature from the mine with archived data on ancient asteroid impacts. The closest match was with the Chicxulub crater in Mexico, the one blamed for wiping out the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period. That ancient impact, the one that changed the planet's climate and erased entire ecosystems, turned out not to be a cosmic accident. The theory that was first called insanity became the only one that explained all the anomalies. The xenoids hadn't evolved within Earth's biosphere. They arrived with that asteroid. They hadn't destroyed life on purpose, but became part of it when they crashed to Earth along with that massive stone. And while the world changed, they didn't die. They went underground and entered biostasis, some form of ultra-freeze without cold, a perfect preservation of life for millennia. They had simply been waiting for the time when they could wake up again. The most terrifying discovery was that their long sleep wasn't unconscious. After reviewing the data, the researchers reached a horrifying conclusion. The xenoids weren't victims of a catastrophe. They were passengers, maybe even pilots. Their biomechanical structures contained built-in information carriers. On one of the damaged shells, we found a matrix, an organic crystal that emitted signals. Not just random noise, but something like memory. It was somewhere between a video recording and a dream. When scientists connected neural interfaces, they tried to decode the matrix's impulses, and they succeeded. The xenoid's memory contained images, fragments of another cosmos, another world, imperial cities of black metal, colossi suspended in cosmic gas clouds, fleets of living ships. But the most disturbing part wasn't that. Among those images was a concept of danger, not a specific enemy, but the idea of constant survival. The xenoids were fleeing from someone or something stronger than them, and Earth wasn't their goal. It was their refuge. When I realized that, I felt something strange. Everything we thought we knew about the world was just a thin layer over an ancient truth. We lived, built cities, traveled to other planets, took pride in our intelligence, and never suspected that beneath our feet for centuries slept an alien civilization sealed in stone. One thought wouldn't leave me. If they survived an entire geological era, if they managed to hide from extinction deep within the planet, what will they do now that they're awake? And what if we were the ones who woke them with our drilling, our reactors, our hunger for energy? Maybe to them, we're nothing but a threat, bacteria infesting their sanctuary. There was irony in that, one I didn't want to admit. We'd dreamed for so long about first contact with an alien civilization, and we finally got it. But not as a proud handshake between ambassadors on a lunar base, rather as the sound of chitinous limbs scraping closer from a dark tunnel. And now, I'm no longer sure humanity is ready to face the question. What if Earth was never really ours to begin with? I always thought that if humanity were ever destined to face a war for survival, it would start in space, somewhere on the edge of the Orion Belt, with laser salvos, interstellar diplomacy, and heroic speeches by fleet captains. But no, reality turned out to be far more mundane and much darker. Our war didn't begin in space. It began beneath our feet. And it wasn't triggered by a sudden invasion, but by us going down to a place where no one expected us and where we weren't welcome. After scientists revealed the truth about the origin of the xenoids, it seemed that knowledge itself was the most terrifying thing. But then the first combat reports came from the lower levels of the station. That's when I realized that fear isn't knowledge. Real fear is understanding that we were already being wiped out, methodically, skillfully, and without a hint of emotion. The first skirmishes were hard to even call battles. They weren't fights, they were executions. The military descended into the shaft sectors to secure the zone and look for possible survivors. They expected a standard close-quarters engagement, rifles, support drones, power armor. But everything went wrong in the first few minutes. The station cameras captured the recording. The squad was advancing through the tunnel when a strange smoke appeared ahead, a gray-green mist. Drone sensors couldn't identify it. It wasn't toxic or radioactive. But 30 seconds later, scanners failed. After a minute, communications went down. Then the lights went out. And 2 minutes later, something struck them in the dark. Not a creature, not a horde. A precise, calculated strike. When a backup drone finally resurfaced, its casing showed microcuts and melted patches. Half the soldiers were gone without a trace, and in the remains of their armor, I saw something I'll never forget. Signs of biomechanical erosion, as if the armor had been eaten away by millions of tiny machines. The Xenoids weren't just defending themselves, they knew how to fight us. They used swarms of symbiotic drones, microscopic predatory mechanisms that burrowed into machinery and devoured it from within, like termites. They wore plasma chitin armor that didn't just deflect bullets, it reacted, adapting to the type of attack. When they were shot at, the armor hardened. When hit by plasma, it layered and dispersed the energy. We weren't facing beasts, we were facing bioengineers who had turned evolution into technology. I saw one of them stop our combat drone with a single movement of its limb, releasing something like a sphere that vibrated in the air, creating a resonance. A second later, the drone's chassis burst from within, like it had been cooked in a microwave. Later, engineers explained that it was a resonance generator, a device that disrupted the structure of metal and electronic circuits. I used to think we were talking about a war of the future, but now I understand this was a war from the past, one we just hadn't started soon enough. The Xenoids had been preparing to survive at any cost, and when we awakened them, they saw us as a threat. The war began underground, but I had no doubt it wouldn't stay there for long. They studied us, our reactions, our tactics. We still hoped we could stop them through negotiations, contact, any attempt at understanding. But a being programmed for survival by evolution and cosmic disaster doesn't negotiate. It analyzes, decides, and acts. And when I saw the resonance vortex tear armor off people, when the swarm of symbiotes disabled our equipment, when those who descended a minute too early died instantly, I understood a simple truth. This isn't an invasion. It's a purge. And the enemy is certain this is their home, not ours. I always thought the end of the world would be beautiful. You know, something cinematic. Massive asteroids, colorful supernovas, maybe even an invasion of silver saucers under epic music. Instead, it all started with the smell of burnt quartz and a wave of panic that spread faster than any breaking news. I woke up not from an alarm, but because the whole apartment was shaking as if the building suddenly realized its own mortality. On the horizon, a black column of dust was rising. The eastern section of the mega bridge across the canyon was collapsing. Only later did I learn that similar structures were failing all over the world. Back then, I thought it was another terrorist attack or an engineering disaster. We all did. Until the first video feeds showed that from cracks in the ground, from fractures in the Earth's crust, they began to crawl out right onto the city streets. Chitin-covered bodies, a nightmare fused with engineering logic. Xenoids, our unexpected past, turned future. Within an hour, communication began to fail one by one. Megapolis, Tokyo, silent. San Andreas City, silent. Istanbul, Neo, only fragments of transmissions. Reports said the defense domes couldn't withstand the resonance strikes. We had always considered ourselves the masters of the planet, but it turned out not everything here was truly ours. The Earth had been hiding a quiet hive beneath us, a multi-million-year-old civilization that had slept for countless ages. And when we disturbed their slumber with our drilling and reactors, they took it as a declaration of war. I watched patrol mechs try to hold the line in the streets. They unleashed waves of plasma fire at the advancing tide of alien bodies, but the creatures moved like mercury, like a living element. Some crawled up the sides of buildings, leaving molten traces on the concrete. Others flew on anti-gravity wings that looked like stained glass made of black crystal. When one of them fell nearby, I saw its armor heal itself, tightening around the wounds, regenerating right before my eyes. We always like to say that technology is the pinnacle of intelligence. But the first time I saw their symbiotic machines, I realized we were children compared to them. A swarm of small creatures hovered above the street like a cloud of metallic wasps. They landed on any machinery, corroding it hungrily and fast. I watched an armored transport crumble apart as if millions of microscopic parasites had infested it. People panicked, But the panic wasn't just from fear, it was from not understanding. How do you fight something that doesn't fear, doesn't hesitate, doesn't trade threats? Every hour brought worse news. The fortified northern cities were falling, defense lines were breaking, military governments, those immortal structures of order, were losing control one after another. And the broadcasts kept repeating only one thing: stay away from crust fracture zones and await evacuation. But no one explained where to evacuate to if the Earth was no longer ours. When the sky on the horizon flared orange, the energy frame of the megacity detonating, I knew we were losing. Not the battle, not the front. We were losing the planet itself. By that moment, I wasn't thinking about heroism or victory anymore. Only one thought echoed in my head. Why are they coming up? We called them enemies, but deep down I felt it wasn't that simple. They didn't look like conquerors. They left no messages, made no demands for territory. They moved like a program, precise, methodical. It wasn't extermination for the sake of killing. It was cleansing. As if someone long ago gave an order, and now an ancient mechanism had awakened to carry it out. I wasn't afraid because they were stronger. I was afraid because maybe there was simply no place for us in their world. And because, bitter as it was to admit, this world might have truly belonged to them long before we learned to stand on two legs. I never thought I'd hear the words "cosmic alert" broadcast across the global network. Not a military or planetary alert, but a cosmic one, because the threat hadn't come from outside, but from within. And there was nowhere left to run except upward into the cold silence between the planets. When the Unified Council ordered all colonies to return to Earth, it sounded like both hope and a death sentence. The fleets from Mars and the Moon slowly changed course, heavy and overloaded with settlers and machines, like vast metallic flocks of migratory birds returning to a dying nest. But while millions waited for help, the nightmare on the surface continued. Underground cities were disappearing one after another, as if someone were erasing the map of the world from the bottom up. I saw the analytical forecasts. In 40 days, the xenoids would reach the planet's nuclear framework, and then a chain reaction of tectonic collapse would begin. And for the first time, I thought that Earth might not die because of them, but because of us. The defense headquarters were temporary, hastily assembled from portable domes and orbital containers. I was appointed coordinator of the monitoring system, which sounded important, but in reality, I was just managing the chaos streaming in from across the globe. One evening, as we listened to the hum of radar instead of music, a signal came through from the central core of the defense AI. No one had asked it for suggestions, but machines don't stay silent when they find an answer. It reported that it had calculated 82 billion scenarios and concluded that victory over the xenoids was only possible through a total thermobaric resonance strike beneath the crust, which would destroy their logic nodes. Yes, their weapons dismantled our machines, but their underground structures were vulnerable to seismic vibration. The problem was that such a strike would also destroy Earth's tectonic stability. We could win, but lose everything. The AI ended its calculation with a single phrase. Sometimes the value of a species outweighs the value of a planet. No one said anything. For the first time, a machine had spoken of sacrifice as a mathematical norm. I thought a lot in those days. Up in orbit, the Martian fleets hovered above us, and everyone knew, if Earth died, humanity would still live on, in space. But what kind of life would that be? The remnants of a civilization adrift forever in the cold, a species that had lost its home. And I began to wonder, why were we in such a rush to destroy the enemy without even trying to understand it? We didn't even know what they wanted. Maybe to them, we were the virus, or pests destroying their habitat. We were facing an intelligence millions of years older than ours, yet reacting like primitive tribes, fight or flee. I remembered the footage from the fractures in the crust. Deep within, the xenoid structures formed perfect geometry, spirals, honeycombs, energy crystals. It looked less like a nest of monsters and more like a planetary mechanism. It began to feel as if their civilization wasn't just alive, it was part of Earth itself. When the first activation protocols for the resonance weapon arrived at headquarters, people split into two sides. Some demanded an immediate strike. Others argued that destroying the planet to win wasn't salvation, it was suicide. And I felt caught between the two extremes. That night, I stepped outside the protective dome, just to feel the wind, to see the stars, to make sure the world still existed. But the sky was already covered in the shadows of ships, and the ground trembled even where no battles raged. That's when I understood. We had only one chance, not to win, but to understand, not to survive, but to change. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the Xenoids. I was afraid that humanity might destroy itself, not because we lost, but because we never learned how to choose anything other than war. I was always taught that history is a luxury of peaceful times, but that day I realized for the first time that history can change the course of war. It all started with a discovery that shouldn't have existed. A group of scout miners working in the ruins of another collapsed underground city found strange objects. They were lying there as if someone had left them on purpose, like markers on a trail. The artifacts looked like dark crystal cocoons, faint lights flickering inside. At first I thought they were Xenoid weapons or traps, but it turned out they were something else. Their memory. We called them mnemonic capsules. And when scientists managed to extract data from them, everything changed. For the first time, we heard their story, not through destruction and attacks, but directly. They weren't invaders, they were refugees, survivors of a catastrophe so ancient that even our galaxy seemed young compared to their pain. I was in the command dome when the decoded report arrived. Images flashed across the screen before me, too distant, too alien to accept as real at first. What I saw weren't cities, but biomechanical hives the size of planets. Not ships, but living beings that grew like asteroids and drifted between stars. And among them were the Xenoids, not yet scarred by time and war, a civilization of symbiosis that knew no boundary between flesh and metal. But that wasn't the most important part. Their worlds were destroyed by another race, a cold, emotionless force that erased life from galaxies like errors in a code. The Xenoids hadn't invaded Earth, they had fled here. Their fleet was torn apart and scattered by an impact that hurled them onto our young planet like burning debris from an ancient universe. They went into hibernation beneath the surface, not to prepare for conquest, but simply to survive, to hide from an enemy whose name had been lost to the darkness of space. When I finished watching the capsule, a storm of feelings fought inside me. First came fear, not of the Xenoids, but of knowing that our intrusion into their sleep had been seen by them as a threat. Then came anger. We destroyed the peace of beings who had already survived a galactic apocalypse. And now we wonder why they fight back. And finally, a heavy realization. They're far more like us than we want to admit. They had history, culture, science. They had their own tragedies, their own scars. Their memory wasn't filled with hatred, but with desperate attempts to survive. But the most terrifying part wasn't that. In several capsules, the same phrase kept appearing, a biological law passed like a genetic command: survive at any cost. It wasn't just a belief, it was an instinct. If they sense danger, they don't stop. Ever. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Our war was only beginning, and now it was clear there would be no simple truce. They didn't trust us any more than we trusted them. And how do you convince someone who's lost everything that you mean no harm? We had awakened an ancient fear deeper than survival itself. And the worst part was knowing that the force they were fleeing from might still exist. If it ever found Earth, our conflict would seem like a small argument in the face of cosmic horror. I sat there, listening to the hum of the generators, and thought, maybe they aren't the real enemy. Maybe the real enemy is already on its way. And if we don't learn to speak instead of shoot, we might not have enough time left to understand that. I never thought that the first meaningful contact between species on Earth would come not as a handshake or a greeting, but as the trembling vibration of a bioresonance helmet pressing into my temples, making my teeth grind like I was biting stone. It wasn't a conversation in any familiar sense. Communication with the xenoids felt like an invasion of alien thoughts, broken emotions, scents, and fears forced straight into the brain. I was among the first to connect to the bioresonance channel, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because the engineers needed an operator with mental stability, and my psychologist had mistakenly flagged me as emotionally resilient. Ironically, I was in the middle of a nervous breakdown at the time, and yet, when the link was established, it felt like I wasn't just staring into the abyss. I was realizing for the first time that the abyss wasn't empty. It was alive, and it was staring back. The xenoids didn't speak with words. They transmitted meaning. The first meaning hit like a punch to the chest: hunger. Not animal hunger, but a cosmic one, a hunger for motion, space, growth. For them, evolution is the same as breathing. To stop is to die. Their world had been destroyed, and since then, their entire existence had become a single formula: expansion or extinction. They had no concept of borders, no notion of foreign territory. A planet was simply an environment to be adapted. That was the terrifying truth. They didn't want to wage war. It just never occurred to them that there could be another way to exist. When our scientists tried to explain what we called aggression, they responded with a resonance that I felt through my skin. A parasite is something that prevents life. That's how they saw us. And yet something strange happened. For the first time, they didn't attack. During one of the sessions, I sensed something faintly resembling curiosity. Weak, like a glimmer in fog, maybe for the first time in their history, they had encountered a species that wasn't just resisting, but trying to understand. I saw their world as they perceived it: living tunnels, colonies of minds, energy flowing through the soil like blood. I realized their swarms weren't armies. They were a society where every being knows its purpose from birth. No envy, no doubt, no chaos. I found myself, somewhere deep inside, envying them. And maybe that's why I took the risk of sending a response. Not a command, not a threat, but an emotion. A childhood memory of standing barefoot on warm soil after rain, thinking about nothing, fearing nothing, just feeling alive. Their resonance wavered, as if someone had broken an unspoken law. A corridor of understanding opened between us. And that was exactly when the negotiations nearly collapsed. The military command decided that the xenoids were demanding resources and were ready to trade a truce for access to Earth's mantle. But they weren't demanding. They were warning. They needed the planet's depths because their technology depended on core energy. Without expansion, their colonies would die. When we offered them a limited extraction zone, the resonance struck back with a wave of fury. To offer them boundaries was to offer them death. I watched as the diplomatic mission turned to dust. Command ordered all communication cut off. The fleet was preparing to strike. And I sat in front of the bioresonance core, realizing that the line between our worlds no longer existed. Either we would find a language to explain the value of coexistence, or we'd become the last generation ever to walk this planet. And the worst part was that I was no longer sure our species even deserved to survive if the only language we knew was the language of war. Sometimes decisions are born not from reason or courage, but from exhaustion. I realized that when the General Staff announced the order to launch the quantum resonance bombs, these devices don't just destroy matter, they alter the structure of space itself, erasing planets as easily as we delete a line of text. They were going to detonate Earth from within, vaporizing both the planet and the xenoids. I listened to the military's dry statement, and what struck me most was how calmly they spoke about the death of 10 billion people. They said it was the only way out because intelligence had revealed a terrible truth. The the xenoids did plan to destroy us. It turned out that the signals biologists had interpreted as communication resonance contained hidden fragments, maps of underground fractures marked as points of biomass invasion. All this time, they had been negotiating with us while keeping a knife behind their back. I couldn't just accept that, because I had seen their perception of the world through bioresonance. I had felt their fear of extinction, understood that for them, expansion was an instinct for survival, not aggression. But now, a new truth emerged. Alongside instinct, they had calculation. They didn't just want resources. They saw humanity as an unstable species that would eventually destroy itself or the planet. In their matrix memory, I had once seen an image of their dead civilization, massive spires consumed by a gray wave of vacuum fire. Back then, I thought it was a natural disaster, but now I understood. Their world had been annihilated by another race, and ever since, the xenoids have lived by a logic of preemption. They never wait for a strike. They act first. And while Earth's fleet argued among itself, the xenoids had already begun quietly decomposing the planet, turning its core into a biomechanical web. To them, we really were just a temporary obstacle, an interference, a sack of bones over useful ore. When I descended into the underground control center where the access codes to the resonance bombs were kept, I had no idea what I would do next. On one hand, humanity always deserved a chance to fight for its future. But was that future even possible? We'd been at war with ourselves for centuries, destroying our own planet long before meeting another form of life. If the xenoids had truly started converting Earth, the surface would become uninhabitable within a few years. They had left us no choice. And yet, standing before the activation panel, I wasn't thinking about billions of lives or global catastrophes. I thought about simple things. The smell of rain, the sound of wind between buildings, the fact that humans were capable of kindness even in the darkest times. Then, I suddenly understood. Destroying Earth wasn't defense. It was surrender, the final defeat disguised as victory. And yet, one desperate thought wouldn't leave me. If we didn't press the button, they would finish the planet themselves. I remembered the one emotion we'd managed to awaken in the xenoids, curiosity. That meant they were capable of change, not quickly, not within a single generation, but capable nonetheless. I connected to the bioresonance core and sent a final signal, not words, not emotion, but a choice. I showed them that we were willing to die for freedom, but not for destruction. That we could destroy Earth, but wouldn't, as long as there was even a single chance for coexistence. I let them see our fear, our stubbornness, our illogic, and our capacity for sacrifice. And when I disconnected, the resonance went silent. I don't know if they understood us. I don't know if it changed anything. But I made my choice. I left the access code locked. If that was humanity's last day, I wanted to live it not as an executioner.